She secretly despised Charlton Heston behind the scenes, and the reason is shocking. Charlton Heston and Sophia Loren, two of the most breathtaking stars to ever grace the silver screen. When they came together for the sweeping historical epic El Cid in 1961, they created movie magic that has endured for generations. Their on-screen chemistry as the legendary Spanish knight and his proud, beautiful wife captivated audiences worldwide, creating the impression of a perfect Hollywood pairing. But behind the cameras, a very different story was unfolding, one of mounting tension, professional disrespect, and a rivalry so intense that Sophia Loren would privately vow never to work with Charlton Heston again. They looked madly in love on screen, but the minute Anthony Mann called cut, they couldn't stand to be in the same room together, revealed a longtime assistant director who worked on the troubled production. It was the most convincing acting I've ever witnessed, because I knew what was really happening when the cameras weren't rolling. For over 6 decades, Loren maintained a dignified public silence about her true feelings toward her famous co-star. But in private conversations with close friends and the occasional unguarded interview moment, the truth gradually emerged, and it's far more shocking than fans could have imagined. What could the commanding, charismatic Charlton Heston have done to earn the lasting contempt of his Italian co-star? The answer involves a stunning betrayal during the filming of one of cinema's most emotional scenes, a moment so professionally devastating that Loren later confided to a friend it was the most deliberate humiliation any actor has ever inflicted on me. The most disturbing revelation surrounds a pivotal moment in the film where Heston made a demand so outrageous that it left the director speechless, a power play designed to diminish Loren's performance in what should have been her character's most powerful scene. When Loren discovered what had happened, she was not just angry, she was heartbroken. To truly understand this legendary Hollywood feud, we must journey back to the sun-drenched Spanish locations where El Cid was filmed, where two of cinema's most beautiful stars were about to discover they had absolutely nothing in common, except their mutual determination to outlast each other. What makes this particular Hollywood rivalry so fascinating isn't just that these two stars disliked each other, it's how completely they managed to hide their contempt while creating one of cinema's great love stories. In an era before social media could expose every on-set disagreement, stars had both the ability and the professional obligation to keep their true feelings hidden from the public. For Sophia Loren, raised in the poverty of post-war Naples and still establishing herself in American films, El Cid represented a crucial opportunity to prove herself as more than just a beautiful face. For Charlton Heston, fresh from his Oscar-winning triumph in Ben-Hur, it was another chance to cement his status as Hollywood's premier historical hero. These competing agendas, combined with fundamentally different acting philosophies and the pressure of an expensive, difficult production, created the perfect conditions for conflict. What began as professional tension would escalate into something far more personal, a clash that would influence both stars' future career choices and leave wounds that never fully healed. The story of what really happened between these cinema legends reveals not just a clash of personalities, but a fundamental divide in how they viewed acting, storytelling, and the very nature of movie stardom itself.
But my love won't die.
Kill it.
You kill it! Tell me you don't love me.
1. Doomed from day one, the power struggle that started before they even met. In 1961, producer Samuel Bronston embarked on his most ambitious project to date, El Cid, a sweeping historical epic about the legendary Spanish knight who united Christian and Muslim forces in medieval Spain. With its massive $6.2 million budget, equivalent to over $57 million today, spectacular Spanish locations, and thousands of extras, El Cid was positioned to be the most impressive historical film since Ben-Hur. For the crucial leading roles, Bronston needed stars with both acting ability and international appeal. Charlton Heston was the obvious choice for the title role of Rodrigo Diaz de Vivar. At 37, fresh from his Oscar-winning triumph in Ben-Hur, Heston had established himself as Hollywood's premier historical hero. His chiseled features, commanding presence, and experience with epic productions made him perfect for the role of the legendary Spanish warrior. For the role of Doña Jimena, El Cid's proud and passionate wife, Bronston made a bold choice: 27-year-old Italian sensation Sophia Loren. Though already a major star in Europe, Loren was still establishing herself in Hollywood, eager to prove she was more than just a beautiful face, She had recently won acclaim for her powerful dramatic work in Two Women and represented the passionate, emotional counterpoint to Heston's more stoic screen presence. On paper, it seemed like an ideal pairing, but trouble began brewing before either star even arrived in Spain. The conflict started with the contract negotiations, revealed Alfonso Castillo, an assistant to producer Bronston, who witnessed the pre-production tensions. Heston's deal specified top billing in every market worldwide. When Sofia's team discovered this, they were furious. The dispute wasn't merely about ego. In Italy, France, and much of Europe, Lauren was actually a bigger box office draw than Heston. Her representatives argued that in those markets, her name should appear first on posters and in credits. Heston's team refused to compromise. They eventually reached an awkward solution where the billing would be diagonal on posters, Heston's name first, but to the left, with Lauren's placed higher but second, explained Castillo. It was a clumsy compromise that satisfied no one, and both stars knew it was simply postponing the power struggle to come. When production began in Spain in January 1961, the stars arrived with fundamentally different approaches to their craft. Heston, methodical and intensely prepared, had spent months studying Spanish history and training with medieval weapons. He approached El Cid as another in his gallery of historical titans, a role demanding dignity, restraint, and heroic bearing above all else. Lauren, trained in the more emotionally expressive Italian tradition, arrived ready to portray Jimena as a fully realized woman with passion, anger, and vulnerability. She expected a collaborative process with her co-star to develop their on-screen relationship. Their first meeting at a costume fitting foreshadowed the difficulties to come. "I was there when they first met," remembered costume designer Veniero Colasanti. Heston gave her a formal handshake and immediately began discussing technical matters, camera angles, shooting schedules, and how certain scenes should be staged. Sofia tried to establish a personal connection, asking about his family and his previous visit to Italy. He answered politely but briefly before returning to technical discussions. I could see the confusion on her face. She was trying to build rapport with someone who seemed interested only in the mechanics of filmmaking. This initial encounter revealed the fundamental difference that would define their troubled relationship. Heston approached acting as a technical craft, while Lauren saw it as an emotional art. Where he sought precision, she sought connection. Where he valued control, she valued spontaneity. These opposing philosophies would create increasingly difficult tensions as filming progressed under the scorching Spanish sun.
There was no other way for me. The man you chose to love could do only what I did.
Why did you come, Rodrigo?
2. The marble man versus the passionate beauty, why she called him a statue without a soul. As El Cid moved into its first weeks of filming, the differences between Heston and Loren's approaches to acting became increasingly problematic. Director Anthony Mann found himself caught between two stars with completely opposite methods of preparing for emotional scenes. Heston would arrive on set having memorized not just his lines, but the exact camera movements, the blocking, even the number of steps he would take in each shot, recalled Carlos Rivera, an assistant cameraman. Everything was calculated and precisely planned in advance. He treated acting like architecture, building his performance brick by careful brick. Lauren, by contrast, preferred to feel her way through scenes, responding organically to her co-star and finding emotional truth in each moment. She wanted rehearsals to explore the relationship between their characters rather than simply blocking out movements. One morning I overheard her say to her assistant, "How can I possibly create love with a man made of marble?" Rivera continued. She was genuinely struggling to connect with Heston, who seemed more concerned with hitting his marks perfectly than creating a believable romance. The first major clash occurred during filming of a pivotal scene where Jimena, believing Rodrigo responsible for her father's death, demands he marry her so she can make his life miserable. The scene required intense emotion from Lauren while Heston needed to remain stoically dignified. Director Anthony Mann wanted to capture the raw emotion of their confrontation in extended takes, allowing the tension to build naturally. Lauren embraced this approach, but Heston reportedly expressed concerns about excessive emotionality overwhelming the scene's historical significance. After the first take, which was absolutely electric thanks to Sofia's intensity, Heston approached Mann and suggested they tone down her performance, claimed Juan Moreno, a script supervisor present that day. He actually said, "This isn't an Italian melodrama, it's a historical epic." Sophia overheard this comment, and though her English wasn't perfect, she understood enough to be deeply offended. When Mann sided with Lauren, allowing her to maintain the emotional intensity she had brought to the scene, witnesses report that Heston became increasingly cold and formal in his interactions with both the director and his co-star. He would arrive on set exactly on time, never early, deliver his performance precisely as rehearsed, and leave immediately when his scenes were complete, remembered Carmen Sevilla, a Spanish actress with a small role in the film. There were no shared meals, no casual conversations between takes. Most co-stars develop some kind of relationship during filming, even if they're not particularly fond of each other. But between Charlton and Sophia, there was nothing but professional courtesy, and sometimes barely that. The tension became so noticeable that other cast members began commenting on it. Herbert Lom, who played the Muslim leader Ben Yusuf, later told a British film magazine, "It was like watching two expert dancers performing completely different ballets while pretending to be partners, technically flawless, emotionally disconnected." Matters worsened when production moved to the ancient fortress of Peñíscola for the exterior battle scenes. The summer heat was punishing, often exceeding 100 degrees, and both stars were required to wear heavy period costumes while working 12-hour days. The heat made everyone irritable, but it seemed to affect their relationship particularly badly, said Miguel Gonzalez, a local production assistant. Heston never complained. He prided himself on his professionalism, but he became even more withdrawn. Sophia, being Italian, was more expressive about her discomfort. I remember her asking for additional breaks to cool down, and Heston making a comment, not directly to her, but loud enough to be overheard, about Europeans lacking endurance. The cultural divide between them was becoming a canyon. This fundamental clash of approaches, Heston's Anglo-Saxon reserve versus Lauren's Mediterranean expressiveness, added another layer to their increasingly difficult working relationship. What had begun as a professional disagreement about acting methods was evolving into something more personally hurtful.
Would you take me with you?
No,
3. The wedding night betrayal, the on-set power move that left her in tears. By the third month of production, the professional distance between Heston and Loren had calcified into what crew members described as Cold War conditions. They spoke to each other only when necessary, delivered their lines with professional skill, then retreated to separate spaces between takes. Then came the incident that would transform professional tension into lasting animosity, a moment so shocking that crew members were still discussing it decades later. It occurred during filming of what should have been the emotional heart of the movie, the wedding night scene between Rodrigo and Jimena. According to the script, after their politically arranged marriage, the couple would share a tender moment of genuine connection, with Jimena beginning to see beyond her hatred to the honorable man she had married. Director Anthony Mann had planned an intimate sequence with close-ups, capturing the subtle emotional shifts as these two proud characters began to lower their defenses. For Lauren, this represented a crucial character development that would make her subsequent loyalty to Rodrigo believable. Sophia had prepared intensely for this scene, recalled her personal hairdresser, Giovanna Venturini. She told me it was the key to making Jimena a sympathetic character rather than simply a vengeful woman. She had even discussed the emotional beats with Mann the night before, planning how to show this gradual thawing. The scene began with Rodrigo entering the bedchamber where Jimena awaited in a medieval nightgown. The first part went smoothly, with both actors delivering their lines as scripted, but when it came time for the emotional close-ups, particularly Lauren's reaction as she begins to soften toward her new husband, something unprecedented happened. According to multiple eyewitnesses, including assistant director Julio Sempere, who later spoke about the incident in a Spanish film documentary, Heston approached director Mann during a lighting adjustment and requested a significant change to the scene. Heston suggested that instead of the planned intimate close-ups, they shoot the remainder of the scene in a wider angle that would capture both of them in profile against the dramatic window, Sempere recalled. He argued that this would better maintain the epic visual language of the film. What made this request so unusual and so upsetting to Lauren was that it came in the middle of shooting a scene they had already discussed, and blocked, moreover, the suggested change would specifically minimize the emotional moment Loren had prepared for, where audiences would see Jimena's hatred beginning to transform into understanding. When Mann hesitated, according to Semper and others present, Heston pressed the matter by suggesting the close-ups would slow the film's pace, and noting that his contract granted him approval over key camera setups. "I was standing near Sofia when this conversation happened," said Carmen Sevilla. "She didn't make a scene. She was too professional for that, but I saw her face change as she realized what was happening. He was essentially trying to reduce her emotional moment in a scene crucial to her character. In that moment, something broke between them that would never be repaired." Mann, caught between his two stars and aware of the production's already tight schedule, attempted a compromise by shooting both versions, the planned close-ups and Heston's suggested wider angle, but the damage had been done. Lauren perceived Heston's intervention as a deliberate attempt to undermine her performance in one of her most important scenes. After they finished shooting that day, Sofia returned to her dressing room and broke down in tears. Venturini revealed decades later, "She told me, he doesn't see me as an actress with my own artistic integrity. To him, I'm just a decoration in the background of his heroic story." It was the only time during the entire production that I saw her cry. What made this incident particularly significant wasn't just the creative disagreement, such conflicts are common on film sets, but what it revealed about how Heston viewed his co-star. By attempting to minimize her emotional close-up in favor of a shot that emphasized the architectural grandeur of the scene, he had, in Lauren's view, exposed his lack of respect for her as an equal creative partner. For the remaining 3 months of production, whatever professional courtesy had existed between them disappeared entirely. They now communicated almost exclusively through intermediaries, with Heston sending his assistant to inform Lauren of any concerns rather than speaking to her directly. They became like two separate production units that happened to be filming the same movie, remembered cinematographer Robert Krasker. "We essentially had to schedule them as if they were never available at the same time except when absolutely necessary for shared scenes."
"If you are forsworn, may you die such a death as your brother did."
4. Stolen from the screen. The shocking editing room conspiracy she never forgave. As difficult as the production had been, the worst was yet to come for Sophia Loren. After enduring months of tension and fighting for her character's emotional integrity, she would face one final betrayal that would cement her private disdain for Charlton Heston for decades to come. The incident occurred during post-production, when director Anthony Mann was assembling the first cut of El Cid in Rome. As a courtesy to his stars, Mann invited both Heston and Lauren, who was filming another project nearby, to view selected scenes and provide feedback before the edit was finalized. Lauren arrived for her scheduled viewing with great anticipation, particularly to see how the wedding night scene, the source of such conflict, had turned out. What she saw left her stunned and, according to those close to her, genuinely heartbroken. "She came back from that screening in a state I'd never seen before," recalled Carlo Ponti Jr., son of Lauren's husband and longtime producer Carlo Ponti. Though only a child at the time, he vividly remembered his mother's distress that evening. "She wasn't angry. She was hurt in a deep, fundamental way. She kept saying, 'They took it all away. Everything I built for Jimena, gone.'" What had happened? According to several sources involved in the post-production, including assistant editor Mario Verdi, Heston had made a special trip to the editing suite in Rome before Lauren's scheduled viewing. During this visit, he had leveraged his considerable industry influence to convince the producers to minimize many of Lauren's most powerful emotional moments, particularly in the wedding night scene that had been so contentious during filming. The version Sophia saw had been dramatically altered from Mann's original cut, Verdi explained years later. Most of her critical close-ups had been shortened or removed entirely. The wedding night scene now emphasized exactly what Heston had pushed for on set, the architectural grandeur rather than Jimena's emotional journey. Even more upsetting to Lauren was the discovery that a particularly moving monologue where Jimena explains her conflicted feelings about Rodrigo had been cut from the film entirely. This scene, which Lauren had fought hard to preserve during filming, had been one of her proudest moments in the production. "She had put her heart and soul into that monologue," said Venturini, her hairdresser and confidant. She had even worked with a dialogue coach to perfect her English pronunciation for that specific scene. To discover it had been removed completely, apparently at Heston's suggestion that it slowed the narrative momentum, was devastating to her. When Lauren attempted to appeal directly to Mann about these changes, she discovered something even more disturbing. The director himself had been overruled by the producers, who were concerned about the film's already lengthy running time and were deferring to their male lead's judgment about what should remain. "Anthony was apologetic but helpless," recalled Verdi. "He told her, "Sophia, you gave a beautiful performance, but this is now out of my hands." The financial backers are nervous about the film's commercial prospects, and they're listening to Heston because he has a proven track record in historical epics. For Lauren, this was the final insult, not just to her as an actress, but as a woman in an industry dominated by men. Her character, already secondary to Heston's in the original script, had been further diminished in the editing room, reduced to what she later privately described as a beautiful face looking adoringly at the hero. According to those in her inner circle, this post-production betrayal affected Lauren far more deeply than the on-set tensions. It transformed what might have remained a difficult but forgettable professional experience into something she would carry with her throughout her career, a profound lesson about power dynamics in Hollywood and the vulnerability of an actress's work after filming concludes. "She never spoke publicly about how deeply this hurt her," said Italian director Vittorio De Sica, who worked closely with Lauren on several films, but those of us who knew her well understood that El Cid represented a turning point in how she approached her career. After that experience, she became much more insistent on working with directors she trusted completely and securing contractual protections for her performances. The final cut of El Cid was released in December 1961 to commercial success and generally positive reviews. Critics praised the spectacular battle scenes, the historical grandeur, and Heston's commanding presence as the legendary Spanish hero. Lauren received compliments for her beauty and dignity, but few mentions of the emotional depth she had fought so hard to bring to Jimena. For audiences, the film appeared to be another triumphant historical epic. They had no way of knowing that behind the scenes, a real human drama had played out, one that left lasting scars on one of cinema's most beloved actresses.
We have a word for a warrior with a vision to be just and the courage to be merciful. We call such a man El Cid.
5. Fake smiles, real hatred, the press tour that had publicists walking on eggshells. When El Cid premiered with great fanfare in December 1961, Sophia Loren and Charlton Heston stood side by side on red carpets, smiling for photographers and saying all the right things about their wonderful collaboration. It was a masterclass in Hollywood professionalism, two consummate actors giving perhaps their most convincing performances off-screen. But those involved with the promotional tour witnessed a very different reality behind closed doors. The tension between them was so thick you could cut it with a sword, recalled Patricia Reynolds, a publicist who coordinated several press events for the film. They would arrive separately, stand as far apart as possible during photos, and leave immediately after fulfilling their contractual obligations. There were no shared meals, no casual conversations, nothing like you'd normally see between co-stars promoting a major film. The international press tour for El Cid became infamous among publicity teams for its logistical complexity, not because of scheduling or travel arrangements, but because of the need to keep the stars apart as much as possible while maintaining the illusion of harmony. "We had to create a minute-by-minute schedule ensuring they would spend minimal time together," Reynolds continued. "Charlton would do a newspaper interview while Sophia did radio. Then we'd bring them together briefly for photographs before separating them again. It was like choreographing a ballet where the dancers couldn't bear to touch." At joint press conferences, attentive journalists occasionally noticed the chill between the stars. When asked about working together, both would offer perfectly professional but remarkably generic responses. Heston typically praised Lauren's great beauty and presence, while she would comment on his dedication to historical accuracy. Neither ever shared specific anecdotes or personal insights about the other, a telling omission in an industry built on seemingly intimate behind-the-scenes stories. The London premiere of El Cid in December 1961 provided perhaps the most revealing glimpse of their strained relationship. As they posed for photographs on the red carpet, a reporter asked them to stand closer together for a better shot. "I'll never forget the look that passed between them," said British film journalist Malcolm Edwards, who was covering the event. "It was barely a second, but in that moment, the facade dropped completely. Then they moved mechanically together, maintained frozen smiles for exactly as long as necessary, and immediately stepped apart when the photographers finished." At the reception, following the premiere, Heston and Lauren performed another carefully orchestrated dance, appearing to mingle with the same groups, but never actually engaging with each other directly. When Heston was speaking with producers on one side of the room, Lauren would be entertaining journalists on the other. When they were inadvertently brought together in the same conversation circle, one would invariably find a reason to move elsewhere within minutes. It was the strangest thing to witness, Edwards continued. Here were two people who had just portrayed one of cinema's great love stories, yet they couldn't bear to be in each other's company for more than a few minutes. Yet both were such professionals that unless you were watching very closely, you'd never know anything was amiss. Perhaps the most revealing moment came during a television interview in Rome when a journalist, unaware of the tension, asked them to describe what they had learned from each other during the making of El Cid. An uncomfortable silence followed. Charlton finally said something about Sophia teaching him about European passion for the material, remembered Lorenzo Camerini, who worked as a translator for the Italian press events. It sounded like a compliment until you realized he was essentially calling her overly emotional. Sophia's response was equally pointed. She said Charlton had shown her how precisely American actors plan every moment. To anyone who understands acting approaches, they were essentially criticizing each other's methods while smiling perfectly. As the promotional obligations for El Cid finally concluded in early 1962, both stars returned to their separate worlds with evident relief. Heston went back to Hollywood and his next historical epic, while Lauren returned to Italian cinema and her collaborations with directors who valued her emotional approach to acting. Neither would ever work together again, despite multiple opportunities that arose over their long careers. When producers of The Fall of the Roman Empire, 1964, suggested reuniting them, both politely but firmly declined. Industry insiders understood the unstated reason. Once was more than enough.
I'm home. All the time.
6. The Silent Revenge. How she erased him from her history for 60 years. In the decades that followed El Cid, keen observers began noticing a pattern in how Sophia Loren discussed her extensive career. When asked about former co-stars like Marcello Mastroianni, Cary Grant, or Clark Gable, her face would light up with genuine warmth as she shared affectionate anecdotes and praised their talents. But when Heston's name arose, something changed. Her smile would tighten, her answers would become brief and formal, and she would quickly steer the conversation in another direction. It became almost a game among entertainment journalists, noted veteran Hollywood reporter Robert Osborne. Could you get Sophia Loren to say more than 2 sentences about working with Charlton Heston? Almost no one succeeded. Loren, raised in poverty in Naples and having survived World War II as a child, had learned early that direct confrontation wasn't always the wisest strategy. Instead, she developed a more subtle but ultimately more devastating response to Heston. She simply excluded him from her narrative. In her various memoirs, television appearances, and retrospective interviews spanning decades, Loren would discuss virtually every significant film and co-star in her career. Except Heston El Cid, despite being one of her biggest international productions, received only passing mentions in her autobiographies, typically focusing on the Spanish locations or director Anthony Mann's visual style rather than her leading man. During a 1976 film retrospective in Paris, Loren spoke enthusiastically about working with leading men from Cary Grant to Marcello Mastroianni to Clark Gable, sharing warm personal anecdotes about each. When moderator Claude Chabrol mentioned El Cid and her work with Heston, she smoothly pivoted to discussing the magnificent Spanish landscapes and the challenges of performing in a second language, never once addressing Heston directly. This pattern of selective memory continued throughout her career. In a 1991 interview with Barbara Walters, Loren became animated discussing various co-stars, describing Peter Sellers as a comic genius with a beautiful, troubled soul, and praising Richard Burton's magnificent voice and generous spirit. When Walters mentioned Heston, Loren simply nodded and said he was very professional, before immediately shifting to discussing director Anthony Mann's visual approach to El Cid. Perhaps the most telling example of Loren's subtle revenge came during a 1995 American Film Institute tribute to her career. In a montage celebrating her famous on-screen partnerships, clips from El Cid were conspicuously brief, just enough to acknowledge the film's existence without dwelling on it. When the camera cut to Loren after the Heston clips, viewers noted a momentary tightening of her famous smile before she graciously acknowledged the applause. Sophia doesn't need to speak ill of anyone, observed veteran Hollywood columnist Shirley Eder. She simply illuminates her treasured colleagues so brightly that those left in shadow become all the more noticeable. This strategy proved far more effective than any public criticism would have been. By simply excluding Heston from her rich tapestry of career reflections, Lauren created a conspicuous absence that spoke volumes. Industry insiders understood the message. Of all the co-stars in her remarkable career, only Heston was unworthy of her reminiscences. When asked directly about Heston in a rare unguarded moment during a 1999 interview with Italian television, Lauren provided perhaps her most revealing comment. In cinema, as in life, some people are interested in true connection, while others are concerned only with how they appear. I have always preferred the former. The elegant simplicity of her decades-long approach demonstrated why Sophia Loren remained not just a great actress, but a woman of remarkable strategic intelligence. She understood that in Hollywood, being excluded from the narrative can be far more damaging than being criticized within it.
If you are forsworn, you die such a death as your brother did, struck from behind by the hand of a traitor.
7. The cold calculation. Why he deliberately sabotaged Hollywood's most beautiful woman. While this story has focused primarily on Sophia Loren's experience, it's important to consider Charlton Heston's perspective on their troubled collaboration, particularly as it reveals fundamental differences in their approaches to acting and stardom. By all accounts, Heston approached El Cid with the same professionalism and dedication he brought to all his roles. Known for his meticulous preparation, he spent months studying Spanish history and medieval warfare, even learning to ride horses and handle swords with convincing skill. His commitment to his craft was never in question. Gore Vidal, who worked with Heston on Ben-Hur, once observed that Charlton didn't view acting as a collaborative art so much as a personal crusade. He prepared so thoroughly and had such a clear vision of his characters that suggestions from others could feel like intrusions. This approach served Heston well in roles where he portrayed isolated heroes, Moses receiving the commandments alone on Mount Sinai, or Judah Ben-Hur enduring solitary suffering. But in roles requiring intimate connection with a co-star, this self-contained method created barriers. Fraser Heston, Charlton's son, who later became a filmmaker himself, offered perhaps the most insightful perspective on his father's approach. My father came from a generation of actors who believed that maintaining a certain distance preserved the mystery necessary for stardom. It wasn't personal, he simply felt that too much familiarity might diminish the impact of what happened on screen. This philosophy extended to how Heston viewed the hierarchy of storytelling. In historical epics like El Cid, he believed the heroic narrative should take precedence over personal relationships, as he explained in a 1970 interview with American Film Magazine. In these grand historical tapestries, the love story is important, but it must serve the larger heroic journey. The audience comes to see a man become legend, not to watch domestic scenes. This perspective might explain why Heston advocated for minimizing some of Loren's more emotional scenes, not out of personal animosity, but from a genuine belief that they detracted from what he saw as the film's primary purpose. Even Heston's defenders, however, acknowledged that his approach could come across as coldness or arrogance to those who didn't share his artistic philosophy. Director Franklin J. Schaffner, who worked with Heston on Planet of the Apes and The Warlord, once remarked, "Chuck's intensity of focus can be misinterpreted. He's not being aloof. He's being concentrated. But I understand how others might not see the distinction." In his later years, Heston became more reflective about his relationships with co-stars. While never directly addressing tensions with Loren, he acknowledged in his 1995 autobiography that my devotion to preparation and precision sometimes created distance where warmth might have been more beneficial. Acting is a curious profession where the most intimate moments are often shared with virtual strangers. I never fully mastered that paradox. Heston's approach to discussing El Cid in later years was characteristically measured. When asked about working with Loren in interviews, he typically offered professional respect. She brought great beauty and passion to the role, but none of the personal anecdotes or warmth he expressed when discussing other collaborators like Cecil B. DeMille or Orson Welles. Perhaps the most revealing insight into Heston's perspective came from director Anthony Mann, who had the challenging task of balancing his star's conflicting approaches. In one of his last interviews before his death in 1967, Mann reflected, "Charlton approached acting like a master architect, designing every moment with precision and control. Sophia was more like a brilliant jazz musician, responding to the emotion of the moment with instinctive brilliance. Both approaches have tremendous value, but they're fundamentally incompatible. The tragedy of El Cid wasn't that either approach was wrong, it's that they couldn't find harmony between them. This fundamental incompatibility, not simply personality conflict, but a genuine philosophical divide about the very nature of acting, helps explain why what began as professional tension evolved into lasting personal animosity. It wasn't just that they disliked each other, they represented opposing artistic traditions that could find no common ground.
But my love won't die.
Kill it.
You kill it!
8. Perfect strangers, perfect lovers. Hollywood's most convincing on-screen lie. As we look back on the troubled collaboration between Charlton Heston and Sophia Loren, what emerges isn't simply a tale of personal animosity, but a collision of fundamentally different artistic philosophies, cultural backgrounds, and approaches to stardom. Their conflict on El Cid represents something larger than either individual. It symbolizes a turning point in Hollywood history where the classical, monument-like approach to screen acting exemplified by Heston began giving way to the more naturalistic, emotionally accessible style that Loren helped pioneer. In many ways, their inability to connect meaningfully on screen despite their undeniable talents foreshadowed changes in audience expectations. As the 1960s progressed, viewers increasingly favored authenticity over grandeur, vulnerability over stoicism. Though Heston would continue to find success throughout the decade in films like Planet of the Apes, the era of the untouchable heroic icon was waning. Loren's career, meanwhile, flourished as she continued to bring emotional depth and authenticity to roles in films like Marriage Italian Style and A Special Day. Her willingness to appear vulnerable and flawed on screen aligned perfectly with changing audience tastes. What makes their rivalry particularly fascinating is that despite their differences, both approaches to acting had tremendous value. Heston's classical precision created indelible, iconic moments that remain in cultural memory decades later. Loren's emotional authenticity allowed audiences to see themselves reflected in her performances, creating a different but equally powerful connection. The tragedy of El Cid isn't that one approach was right and the other wrong. It's that these two magnificent talents couldn't find common ground to create something that transcended their individual methods. Director Martin Scorsese, reflecting on El Cid during a 2002 retrospective of Anthony Mann's work, observed, "You can almost see the tectonic plates of acting traditions shifting in their scenes together. There's a fascinating tension between Heston's monumental presence and Loren's emotional fluidity. The film captures a moment when Hollywood itself was caught between classical tradition and modern naturalism. Perhaps the most poignant aspect of this story is that despite working together for nearly 3 months, creating a film that would be seen by millions, Heston and Loren never truly knew each other. They remained strangers sharing the same frame, their real connection never approaching the love story they portrayed on screen. In her 2014 memoir, Loren offered what might be her most genuine reflection on the experience, though she still didn't mention Heston by name. Sometimes in this profession, the chemistry that seems so real to audiences is created through the magic of filmmaking rather than genuine connection. Those are the hardest roles, where you must convince the world you love someone with whom you've never shared a moment of true understanding. And that, perhaps, is the most shocking truth behind this legendary Hollywood rivalry. Not that these two stars disliked each other, but that despite creating one of cinema's epic romances, they remained perfect strangers, separated by invisible but impenetrable barriers of temperament, culture, and artistic philosophy.